say about groups and containers is we didn't always have containers. So a lot of times if you wanted to group things together, make them, let's say for a pop-up or for tabs, if you want to make a bunch of controls appear and disappear all together, what you do is you would select all the items. So let's say if we had all these things here, we wanted to select them all. This would probably be a good candidate for a group. What you do is you would select those controls and go over here and click group, and they would be one group here. Now, the annoying thing about a group is, let's say you wanted to just click on this button here, and you click on the button, it just selects the group, and so you actually have to click on it a second time. That's the little bit of annoying thing that I found working with groups. And then
what about if you want to add something or remove something from the group? Is it possible to just add something into a group once it's created or remove it?
Yeah, what you do is you select the group and you select whatever you want to add to it. Let's say we want to add this delete. I'm going to hold down control on the keyboard, select the other control. And what I can do is group, and I would add that to the group.
Right. And so if there's no, let's say select like the save button, pretend you're going to add that to the group.
Okay.
And is there any other way if you didn't hold control to add it to the group?
You also have shift.
Okay.
Shift works as well. Now, typically within the Windows operating system, I can't talk to how Apple and other operating systems are, but within Windows, control is used to select multiple things. So if you're in Windows Explorer and you have some files there and you want to select, 3 out of 15, you would select the first one, hold down control, and select the other two. And then the shift would be, let's say you wanted to select a range. So you've got 100 different files in a folder and you wanted to select the middle 50 out of 100. Well, you would select the first one in the range and hold on shift and select the bottom one. It would select all the ones in between. Mm-hmm. So it just so happens to be if you use that in this context, it's sort of like the same thing.
But if you say there's on the tree view menu, there's the label 5, whatever. If you click on that,
label
that one there,
label 5 there.
And click on the 3 ellipses next to it.
Sure.
You can't add it to the group using that method, right? You have to use either the shift or control, as you said.
Yeah. You need to have the group selected if you want to sort of merge a control into that. So yeah, that is the way. And so I'm holding down the control to select both of them here in the tree view. So that control, and I'm sure the shift works the same way here within the tree view.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then so once your items are grouped together, then you can go ahead and what are the advantages? Set one setting for all of them, sort of thing.
Yeah, you can. So you select the group here, and now you have to keep in mind, you got to ask yourself, what are the common properties in every single one of these? So pretty much every UI component or every control here will have a visible. So you could go down here and select visible. And so that's typically what you would do if you wanted to show or hide things in a group. Set the visible perhaps to a variable, and then that variable could be set on some type of a toggle control. Now, something to keep in mind about groups, and this is the distinction between groups and containers, which we'll go into more here in just a moment, is that a container is a control where a group is not. A group or a grouping is just it's just a logical, hey, we're going to put these things together, we didn't always have containers. So groupings is all it's sort of like the best way of sort of doing that. And some people, if you open up their projects, every single UI component, every control will be inside some group, because they like, when they open up a screen, they like everything to be nice and clean. So we could do something like that. Now, in this case, I don't like this button being in here. So let's say I clicked on, I think, how do I ungroup just one item here? I don't see an item here. So what I'm going to do,
that's an issue I've had before, is once you create a group, you can't ungroup one item, and then you have to delete the whole group, and then I've lost some of the settings like I previously. So I don't know if there's some funny gotchas around.
I think what I've done in the past is I'll cut and then I'll paste back on the screen. Yeah, so that's probably the easiest way. There's not an ungroup.
What did you do there? Sorry, I missed that.
What I did was I did a Control X on the keyboard, or you can right click and cut.
Yeah.
So it was in that group 2, and then I'm just boom here on the screen, and then I paste.
Okay, so
And
you just cut the item out of the group and then pasted it back in just outside of the group, and they go back in. That's a useful tip right there.
Yeah, so we have 3 UI components at the bottom that are buttons here. So what we could do is we could group these 3 things together, and we could have, let's say, a grouping of things on the right side, left side. So I'm going to select that group. I'm going to select this form, and I'm going to see if, let's add the form over to that. Okay. So we sort of have the right side, everything. We didn't add the label there, but so those are groups, and I've used groups a lot in the past. Again, because I didn't have containers, and containers have been out for a little while. I don't have a date for you when they were released, but that's how I did tabs and pop-ups and everything. But containers is the better way, because you can the container is actually a component, a control. I think I'm just going to go to the screen 2 where we don't have a lot going on here, and we'll just go from scratch, because I also wanted to cover the tabs here. I'm going to click on these plus sign, the insert, and I'm going to go down and find, not interested in popular or custom or input. It's down here, container. So add a container here. Yeah, so what we can do is add controls directly to this container. So we've got text boxes here that you would normally have like in a pop-up. Add a label here. What's great about this is that whenever we have a bunch of input controls here, I'm going to copy and paste a few of them here. And with groupings, what you had to do before is you had to select everything and set the visible for everything. But here with a container, what you can do, and I'm going to set the border to this, since it's actually a control and not a logical grouping, okay, is that if I have a button that toggles the visibility here, let's add a button. I don't want the button inside that container. So something you'll notice when you're inside a container, a control that you put in there, you see the X and the Y coordinates over there on the right side? There's zeros. So this is actually a parent control of all these things that are inside. So you got a parent-child relationship. And so the X and the Y are relative to, the upper left corner of this container control here.
Okay,
so
so
I want it
just,
to be,
just so I understand it, the X and Y in there are actually are specific to the container, not to the screen. So and then if you click outside on the screen now, the X and Y is actually for the screen and not the container.
Yeah, so what I did is I did what I did on home screen. I did a Control X, and I did a paste over here on the screen. And so you see it sort of broke out. So it's completely free from that being inside there.
So are those items inside the container? Are they, if you with a group, you could drop the group name and then everything was listed underneath? Is that the same for containers? If you right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so so it's like a subset. Sort of like
right.
Sort of like how you have a gallery. Gallery is like a parent. They're sort of nested inside there. Yeah.
Cool.
So so you notice that I only have the container selected here on the tree view. And what we could do is we could set up the visible to be a variable. So we'll name that global show container. Okay. Now that hasn't been really defined yet. So what we can do here in this button is we can use the set function. That. And I'll use the not to reverse that. So I'll click on that. There we go. Now it appears. So if I had to run this, see that I can toggle the appearance and disappearance of this container. Say,
cool. And what sort of settings does the container have? Is it just the general property settings that you would have for any object?
So as you can see here, these are the, I guess, the main properties.
Mm-hmm.
So position, size, padding, color, border.
Okay, so it's quite basic. There's not actually much to it in that sense.
I mean, you do have advanced. So
okay, cool.
Now, a lot of times before the container control, what I would use is a rectangle to be like a background to hold a background color. And so what's nice about that is, I've got the board. I don't have to use a rectangle. I've got a nice border, like with a grouping. It has no UI substance there, where a container actually does.
Yeah, and also using I use rectangles all the time, so this is going to be really useful because it's also getting the layering right, and sometimes you're trying to select an item when it's something when it's sort of so it gets really complicated to be able to select it sometimes, and it's ordered.
I'm keeping an eye on the comments here. There's a Facebook user is not identified. Happy holidays, everyone. Happy holidays to you. Holidays. Yeah. Data is king. Great tip. I didn't know about the holding of the control to add another object to the group. I was ungrouping and creating the group again.
I was doing exactly the same thing. So that's why I said that was a great tip there, because that was frustrating for me.
And then Mohammed, hi, thanks for your videos. Struggling these days with an offline app. Any hints? That might be a topic that we would probably cover in a different session. Definitely. So,
Mohammed, I've made a note of that. We'll
add that to our list, right?
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah, but thanks for mentioning that. All right, so now something I wanted to mention over here on the screen. If you play around what we had before on that home screen, we had a group. Let's look at what we have here. We could ungroup it, but look at this. Add the container. What does that do?
Did you just group a container or something? No.
What I wanted to show you was, okay, so in applications, if you're like me, I've always been used to using groups. And, when containers came along, I saw them, I'm just so used to using groups. And then when I became familiar with containers, I'm like, oh, this is actually better. You can actually, select that and, you can remove a container, but it was a grouping. And what I did was, we have another grouping down here that we created. Yeah, group 4. You can actually convert that to a container. It says add a container, but you're actually converting it to a container. So if you have an application with a lot of groups all over the place, you can easily change that.
Is there any gotchas with that? Let's say you've set some variables within your group. Do they get transferred over to the container, or do you lose them?
I don't know. I don't know that.
Shall we test it quickly? Is there a way we can quickly test it?
Sure.
On a group? Maybe just the variable, or the visible might be an easy one.
All right, so I converted to container. Now, if we look at the visible for the, I need to make sure the container is selected here.
I lost the session.
But let's look at one of the controls in here. Now, there's still, obviously, they're not visible, so it didn't change any properties of that.
It was just the top level one, really. Of the group.
and the container on the top level is visible, so it didn't change anything there, and it just left it as is. Yeah. So Data's King says, wondering if it's worth the time to convert all my groups in my app into containers. I don't think so, unless you're tired of the little annoyances of the groups. All the groups in my apps that I have, I leave them as groups. But moving forward, any new stuff, I use containers over groups.
Yeah. Do you think would there be any reason not to use you might not know the answer to this, but do you think there'd be any reason not to use a container and use a group, or do you think groups will be phased out and containers are the future type of thing, or is there a use case for both?
Well, since containers have come out, I see them as completely different things. So a grouping is just a logical grouping of things together. It's not a control. You're just lumping them together so you could easily sort of work with them or move them around. Or I mean, you can if you say, oh, I'm using group because I want to change their properties together, well, you don't even have to use a group for that. You can
All
select
right.
multiple controls by using the control and
That's
then
quite handy.
select a property and change it. And so you don't actually have to have a grouping for that.
Because one
Now,
thing, well, just quickly in that, one thing that I do if I have loads of screens, I suppose you can't group screens, can you? You can only group items within a screen.
mhm.
Yeah, it'll be useful if you could group screens because sometimes I end up with loads of screens and I want to group my screens, so I have to
Yeah,
create little partitions, a screen that is a partition sort of thing. But anyway,
yeah. I don't think there's any way to group screens. I've never seen that before. Um, I think there is still a place for groups, even though like people really jump on the containers and like, groups is for the birds, But uh, if you have a lot of control sitting out there, they don't belong in the same container, and it's still sort of nice to sort of group them together to make
mhm,
for a clean tree view control. If you have hundreds of controls, now if you've got hundreds of controls, you might want to break that down into to other screens and not have it all on one screen and make your application sluggish. But
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I wanted to show that. Now, what I wanted to get to tonight was the tabs. A lot of users like tabs in their applications. They like to be in application developers like to break down their UI with different tabs. It's a way of sort of breaking things down. And just looking at the comments here. So data is king. I mainly use groups for creating dialog boxes. Yeah. So, yeah, I would definitely say moving forward, use containers, and really no need to convert them if you don't want to. But in order to create tabs, what I do to create tabs is I create. It's almost how we did the menu
Mhm.
in last week's session. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add. Now we don't need to create it as a component. We could turn it into a component later. But what I'm going to do is add this as a gallery here. I always choose blank galleries, and I want it to go across the top. That's typically how tabs are set up across the top. And I'm going to go with Blake horizontal gallery.
So we're doing just to cover this off. We created a gallery for the menu on the side there. That was the right way of doing it, and we're going to
Mhm.
follow a similar method to create the tabs, right? What you're doing now.
Yeah, we're going to create a gallery
Okay, cool.
to implement the tabs. So and then what's really cool about the buttons is that you can easily make them look like tabs. So I'm going to click on add an item from the insert pane, and here from popular, I'll add in a button. There we go. And what I do is I make these buttons long, like I'm sorry, tall,
Mhm.
and I make the looking for the text alignment here. Instead of middle, I want them to be top. And for the padding, I might make that more like 10. And then what I could do, now this is something that I still would use a rectangle for, is I want a nice background. Let's make this a different color than everything. I'll use a green color, and I'll draw have it take up more space here. And I'll send this to the back, the very back, behind everything. And then for each of these containers here, up here, and go over to the tree view here and make sure that the order is set up right. I want to make sure the containers are on top of the gallery. Order bring to front. There we go.
That makes the buttons look really nice, like little folder tabs, right? Which is what you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. And then think what I want to do is for my containers is keep that like an empty border and then set up my border here on the rectangle. Okay, so the rectangle would always be visible. Bring that in a little bit. So you will have to sort of play around and make sure it all looks right, because what you're doing is almost creating like a little bit of an illusion of tabs with buttons, because there's no tab control. You know, there we go. So this first container, well, let's create the array or the table of values for our tabs. Now we have custom gallery sample here, and we'll overwrite that and add in our own values here. We'll say tab 1. Tab 2. Tab 3. Okay. Now those buttons, we need to have their text property actually pull in from the values that the gallery is bound to. Okay.
Just a quick question, Darren. The tab 1, 2, 3. What were we doing that? We were adding items into the gallery called tab 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
So those items. They haven't been shown anywhere. What are they? They're just placeholders for values.
Yeah. So what I'm about to show you here is if we tie into the gallery by saying this item dot value. See that? We're actually those are the names of the tabs.
Okay.
So we're actually tying into that, sort of like how we did with the menu, which with each of these menu items, we actually tied into the text from the menu.
Yeah.
That we passed into it. Okay. So so does that make sense? What I was doing there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is making sense. Yeah. Thanks.
Great. And then also what I do is, so the first item of this gallery in the tabs is set right here of 212. And whatever it is, I want this tab to be dynamically sort of like take up all the space that's in that. So here I will reference parent.template width and probably subtract either 2 or 4 pixels, depending upon how much space you want between those tabs. Okay. So if I click off of this and look at it, what do you think of that, Barry? Is that about right?
Good. Yeah. Is that dynamic sizing, or is that you just using all the space? It's not really dynamic.
So this gallery here has a property called template size. Now, most of us are familiar with galleries, and they go downward. Most of the time, people don't use horizontal galleries; they use vertical ones. Okay, and this template size is typically the height of the row, right? You're familiar with that, right?
Yeah.
But with a horizontal, it's pretty much the width.
Right.
And so if you were to go over here in this gallery and you were to change this to 300, well, you'd want those buttons to sort of size in and take up that space. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's an element of dynamic sizing in there, but just to fill up the space of the gallery, depending on how many buttons you have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So we got tab 1, 2, 3. So what else do I want to put in here? Okay. So the very first container, we probably want to rename this CNT, short for container, and we'll say tab 1. Now, this could be employee or customer data. Perhaps the first tab is like their personal information, like their name, their birth date, phone number, email address, that type of thing. So in a real application, you wouldn't be calling it tab 1, 2, 3, right? It would be different things. Maybe the second tab would be all their addresses, because they could have multiple addresses, or their orders, or whatever you're dealing with inside your application. Okay, so this first container here, what I'm going to do is for this gallery that's serving as our tabs, I'm going to rename this the gallery tabs. And I'm going to reference the name there. So for this container here, for the visible, instead of even messing with this this variable here, what we're going to determine here on if it's visible or not, we're going to say that gallery above dot selected dot value. Okay, so it's going to give us either tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. As long as that says tab 1, then we're going to be visible. If it's something else, then it's going to be something else. Now, what we don't have are containers for the other two. So we're going to go out and let's create, oops, I accidentally clicked on the wrong screen there. And so we'll add a new container.
Can you duplicate containers with everything in them?
You could. Is that what you like to do?
Might be easier today, because then you could just modify the elements within it. It's got all the properties there.
Now, I think what would be a good idea, since we copy and paste them, is sort of move this around so it's obvious that something's different, right? So we'll call this container CNT tab 2. Okay, then I am going to control paste. And you see what it likes to do? It likes to sort of paste the container in. So you can have nesting containers, obviously. So I'm going to cut that. You know what's funny here? Well, you could have a grouping of containers for your tabs.
Excellent.
Why not? All right, so this last one here, we'll call this tab 3. Okay, now for this third one, I'm going to move it over to make it obvious. Now we need to, on this tab 2, go in down to visible and change this to 2. And for the 3, okay. Now you always want to make sure that this gallery, let's just make sure it's sent all the way to the back. Very good. Got tab 1, tab 2, tab 3.
Wow, that's great. That's yeah, and and how quickly that was, in no time. That was
You're pretty much working with the same tools that you always work with, which are galleries and controls and messing with the visibles and
This is really all you need in terms of basic screen configuration, menu-driven apps. What you've got here, you've got your dynamic menus on the left, and for each screen you can have multiple tabs, and that allows you to collect data and present information in a non-cluttered way and have a good user experience, right? And those are dynamic in a sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you think about what we did, pretty much the previous 2 sessions, we talked about components and menus. We could actually create a tab. You could use tabs at the top for navigation. So what did we do last week when we created our menu? We had a gallery in there, and we had buttons. So you could very easily see how we could use what we covered last week to actually turn this tab a configuration on the screen into a control.
Yeah.
Yeah. So awesome. Mohammed says you can even change the background color of containers, same as the button. Yeah, absolutely. So you could go in here and make this completely dynamic as well. Absolutely. Now, something I wanted to show, I think a lot of people out there in the Power Apps world, they use tabs. I'm sorry. They use forms instead of, like, I personally, I don't like forms. I like to use patch statements to update. But let me go in here and make sure. I'm going to make sure this is all visible again. Say.
While you're doing that, when you're referring back to forms, because I'm the same. There's nothing worse than having to work within a form to write back to some sort of SharePoint list or database, because it's really clunky. So is your preference to capture the information in fields and then collect those and then write them back to the data source?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's say if we're over on this screen here, this is what I would do. I would have text boxes or whatever controls I wanted to use. I would have a little, let's say, a little save button here at the bottom. I would need to make sure this is at the top,
So I think
though.
I think that's a really useful tip for newbies, because if you watch how forms work and galleries, it's normally gallery, then a form, and then you fill in your details on the form, and then the form updates the data store at the back. That is a really clunky way of doing things. So use free text boxes, text fields, and drop down lists and all that sort of thing. Capture the data, just in those fields in a collection, and then write that collection back. That's certainly a much easier way to do it.
Yeah, so here we have a button at the bottom. We were using this for toggle, but inside the on select, instead of having what we have here, if we're using a form, you would say submit form, right? Everybody's familiar with that. The basic thing. We actually covered that and actually have that on the first screen.
Yeah.
We do a submit form. We have a new form. You can say edit form.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, to actually save the data back, you would actually use a function called patch. Now, patch would be probably a session in itself. So we don't have time to go over that tonight, but that's what I typically do in my applications. But what I wanted to address tonight is perhaps most of you do use forms. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to screen 1. I'm going to copy this form and go over to screen 2. And I'm going to paste this form right into this container. Okay. And let's say you didn't have these controls here. In fact, let me hold on. Let me click on. Yeah, I put it into the second container. Let me make sure that's in the first. There you go. All right. So the question is, how could we show or hide? Let's say this form had 50 different fields. Okay. And we wanted to break down this form into 3 different parts. What we could do is select the cards within the form. So like for this, like right here, we have gallery.selected.value equals tab 1. You could select that, and you wouldn't have to use a container for this. You could use the same form, and you could set up these data cards going into the visible and setting up the visible based on which tab is selected. So if you guys are using tabs, you want to use a single form, and you've got a lot of fields and want to break them down, that is a way that you can do that.
So just so I get it right, what you just said there is, so you can basically, when you click on any tab, you can basically go into the form, and there's data cards in the form which represent all the fields, and you can just set those to visible or non-visible, depending on the value of the tab when you select it.
Yeah, let me actually step through and actually demonstrate this, because I don't think I was very clear as I was describing it here. So instead of using containers, I sort of want to get this out of the way here just for a moment. And okay, so the first container, second container, and the third container. Let's make that more like 500 width or 100. That's good. Okay. What we could do is we move that form over here, and it's outside of any of those containers. So this first card, as you just saw me a few moments ago, I went into the visible, and I said, if the currently selected tab is tab 1, it's going to be visible. So let's say for the second and the third card, we'll go in here, visible, and we set this to tab 2. And then for the last ones, we'll set this up to be the third tab. Okay, so I'm going to run it. And since we have the currently selected tab is tab 1 here, as you can see, if I click tab 2, it's showing these two. And just so it doesn't get covered up, I'll put a background color here of white just for a moment. Because I know on the third tab, we had the controls over on the right side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So you're demonstrating there that you can use the tabs to either set properties within the container, or if you've got a form which is outside the container, the tab can also set the properties of what's visible within the form as well. So it's just multiple use cases of how you can use tabs.
Yeah.